Hey guys, here I am again. Today's lecture is a continuation on that first lecture. There's not a whole lot you need to know for the test from that first lecture, but I do like giving it. Now, one of the things I made a point of is breaking this word in half, and that theology half is the study of something, and we talked a lot about psyche. So really the only thing you need to know from that first set of slides is that Psyche was the goddess of the soul. But we're not really studying the soul right. When I go to the dictionary, I look up, what is psychology, and it says it's the study of, so there's the ology part, mind and behavior. So the psyche has come to mean our mind and our behavior, like the psyche of a team or getting psyched out, right? And so it has something to do with this. Now, when I look at these two components, I'm going to add a third one. Let me get on to this real quick. In psychology, we call our mind cognition or thinking, or as our cognition, and we'll get into cognitive psychology later on. And behavior is our actions, of course. That makes sense, right? But I'm going to say here in the middle is this thing called affect. And what is affect? Affect is our energy. Let's say if you're angry. If you're angry, you have some angry thoughts and you might act in a violent way. But really, it's my energy that's all messed up. And so I just want to briefly talk about energy because I'm a big energy freak, and I'll talk about it all the way through the class because I think it has a lot to do with one thing which I live on, which is called emotions. Okay, so you don't have to believe in the chakras like Tim, but I do believe in them. But in Taoism, I teach psychology of religion. They talk about your chi. The chi is the energy force that runs throughout your body. And so we'll get into the biological underpinnings of this chi in the next lectures when we talk about physiological psychology. Here's your 7 chakras. This is from Alex Gray, who does all the tool. Anyway, when I start to think about chi, one of the things I started to evaluate, because I've really got a problem with it, is that every day I only have so much chi. And as I get older, it gets lower and lower. So I'll have only so much energy. If I spend my day allotting my, you don't have to remember this for the test, but I think about this a lot. To this right here, it drains my battery. And I spend a lot of time over there talking to Lucifer or whatever you want to call it. But if I spend my time over here, it doesn't really drain my energy. It actually boosts my energy. If I spend time with good people or reflecting on scripture and things like this, I know that might sound weird, but I think of these as charging stations and these people over here as vampires. If we were in class, I would go into this in a lot more detail. Now, some people are what I call energy beacons. You know these people. Their energy's always good. Every time you're around them, it's like sometimes I hate those people. It's like, oh my God, how'd you get born with that energy? Because I struggle with depression and anxiety a lot. But one of the energy beacons I like to talk about is the Dalai Lama. I mean, that dude is buzzing on a good note, and he doesn't have to take drugs or anything else. He's got that good energy, that good affect, that affective component that I've been talking about. So I say, this is my saying, is if you get your energy right, your mind will follow. Most psychologists try to treat your mind and think that your body, it's like depression doesn't work that way. I wake up in the morning, my energy's already off before my thoughts get there. Yeah, I can maybe think some positive thoughts, but that doesn't counterbalance the fact that there's something wrong with my body. I'll get into this in more detail as we go along. Maybe I'm not as smart as this guy. Definitely I'm not. But look at this guy. He says the same thing. He goes like, everything is energy, and that's all there is to it. If you match the frequency of the reality you want, buzz at the right energy, you will get the things you want. It's the law of attraction, but at a quantum level, because it's saying it's not magic or philosophy, this is called physics. Okay, enough about that point. I'm not going to ask you about all that energy stuff on the test, but we will come back to that concept of affect. Now, the second thing I'm big on is information processing. You as a human being have ton of information. I call it the forest. As I go into the forest or desert, I'm in the desert almost every day. Probably today I'll go out there. But anyway, as I go into the desert, there's all kinds of information. These little eyes are information that I could look at. Maybe as a pine cone or a leaf or a squirrel or whatever it is. Okay, and so as I go into the forest, I only have a limited amount of attention that I can use. I can't pay attention to every single thing in the forest unless I'm on some crazy psychedelic trip, which I've been on a lot of times. But even then, I can't pay attention to every single thing, right? Now, one of the things I get to do is something called selective attention. I get to choose what to pay attention to. We'll get into this later on with your mind because a lot of times I don't do this, okay? But I get to choose what to focus on and what not to focus on. This is called selective attention. Now, if I look at reality over here, same kind of idea. There's all this kind of information over here. You see it over here. Then as it comes into my body, I can choose what, or my mind, I can choose what to focus on. And if I only focus on certain pieces because I can't focus on everything, then that will shape my perception of reality. I hope that makes sense. Later on, I'll talk about this focus. I could go into this thing right here that we don't always do the focusing. The media, the news, whatever else, teachers, we choose to focus on just certain information. Okay, eventually that governs your reaction to reality. We'll get into certain disorders where people misperceive reality and act in inappropriate ways. Okay, so one of the things about information, I'm a big picture guy. I like to know, what are we studying? A lot of times when you get into science classes, I get so bogged down into the microscopic details, I forget what we're doing, especially in math or physics or chemistry. And so if you really look at the sciences, you don't have to remember this for the test. As you move up and up and up, it gets more and more broad. My dad would say more and more easy. You know what I mean? Because he's a hard scientist. Just like, dude, you can only major in this kind of stuff. I don't know if you kind of have the dad. It's like anything above that line is no bueno. But that's the way my dad was. It's just at what level do you study things? So I'm big on cosmic level, the big level. Can study the microscopic level like grains of sand or even a bigger macro picture of the beach or bigger a planet or system of planets or whole galaxy or systems of galaxies. Right, I'm like this guy. I want to study the systems of galaxies. Now, enough about that, but if you think about macroscopic, if I had a party and said, here's the invitation to my party, that's too macroscopic, too big picture. I do need things to be more microscopic, but as I zoom in, it's like, well, I can get to the point where it's so microscopic that if you've never been to Phoenix, that doesn't help either. And so you use information like this all the time anyway, because you have one of these things in your hand and you can just use information on it all the time, right? And you just zoom in and zoom out. You can't see my fingers, but doing this thing right here, making it macro or micro. In this section, I'm going to go through the origins of psychology in a few areas in psychology. And basically, psychology came out of a couple of different areas. One is philosophy. If you think about philosophers, they're over here using their head all the time. They're thinking all the time. And so, because cognition, thinking, cognitive psychology is a big part of psychology, you would think one of the parents would be philosophy. Another one of the parents, forefathers of psychology, is physiology. Now, I don't know if y'all have to take anatomy and physiology. I love it. The more and more I study about it, the more I love it. It's not that I'm an expert in it, but here's my country ass version of anatomy and physiology. Anatomy, what parts do you got? Like, can you name all the bones to the skeletal system? You know what I mean? So I hate that part, but what I really do love is the physiology part. The anatomy is what parts you got. Physiology is how do they work together in concert. Your skeletal system, your nervous system, your circulatory system, your respiratory system, your digestive system, muscular system. The system works in concert with each other. So all the players, the bones or capillaries and arteries and veins, whatever they are, they all work together. This is why I believe in God. You don't have to believe in God, but I'm a big believer because physiology is fascinating. And if I'm stuck in this car, my soul is stuck in this car, maybe I should learn about the car because the car affects me and I affect the car. Okay, I hope that made sense. Now, the first thing I wanted to really talk about, I think it's on your overhead, is this philosopher named George Hagel. It's this weird looking white dude over here. I don't know why he looks so out of it. But anyway, I'm not going to ask you his name or anything. But later on, if you had another class, I get into the Hegelian dialectic, Hegelian, Hegel. But he says dialectic has three parts, and I forgot to say what a dialectic is. I call it an argument. Okay, so in an argument, you have two people that hold different opinions. Think about it in politics. Let me get all this off of here. Okay, the first person states his opinion. So that's the thesis, the first statement. Now, the second person, according to Hegel, disagrees. That's why you have a debate or an argument. You could call it a debate. Think about philosophy. You have debates or arguments all the time. Now you get this back and forth going on. If we were in class, in person, I would just say this. If you want to make a dialectic, just sit down at the dinner table tonight and just start telling everybody what you think about Donald Trump, abortion, gay rights, you know what I mean, on and on and on. You'll have a difference of opinion, I guarantee you. Okay, so you have this fight going on, and then he says sometimes in a dialectic you get a third thing, which is synthesis, which the first and second party go, hey, you're a little bit right and you're a little bit right. Let's take both of our arguments and make a better argument. That's what our government's supposed to be. Don't let me go off on it. Bipartisan, you know what I mean? We have right, left, they work together. A bird has two wings, they work together to form a synthesis, but don't get me started. Okay, so let me give some examples of nature versus nurture. Early on, people were big into nature, like Freud, who I'll talk about, other people. You're just born a certain way. Later on, people will say, oh no, it doesn't matter how you're born, it's the environment you grow up in. And so you had this dialectic. First statement, thesis. Second statement, antithesis, antithesis, right? Against the thesis. And so the argument starts, but now we know it's a combination of both things. I mean, if you've taken any kind of science classes, your DNA plus where you grow up both like come together to make who you are. Now, if you take my psychology of gender class, I'll go off on this because it's like sometimes I want to say to my parents, baby, I was born this way. You know what I mean? Some of it's environment, but some of it's genetics. Okay, another dialectic. Rationalism. Early on, especially philosophers, they would make all these convincing logical arguments, and if it made logical sense, it must be true. So they just reasoned it out in their head. Think about Plato and Socrates and all these other people. They just made these arguments, and if they made good sense, it has to be true. A lot of times I agree with that, but science doesn't agree with that. So the first statement in this case would be rationalist. If it makes good sense in my head, it's true. Or if I can, make a syllogism out of it somehow and make it make logical sense to you. But the empiricists were saying, no, I have to see it with my eyes. So I call this one up here, thinking is believing, and I call this one seeing is believing. Because science is seeing is believing. Can you show it to me, demonstrate it, replicate it, and then we're going to believe it. Okay, so I always think about this because I'm going to show you a million quotes in this class. I love quotes, and quotes aren't empirical. I mean, you can't really prove a quote, but they have a lot of truth. Like, look at this quote from our friend Albert Einstein. Stay away from negative people. They have a problem for every solution. It's so true. But the empiricists would say demonstrate the truth or validity of the argument. And it's like, okay, let's just not everything can be proven through scientific methods, but scientific methods are the ones, that we choose most of the time. Okay, this is the last little area for the introductory material. Psychology, a lot of times I don't want to tell people I have a PhD in psychology because they think I'm a clinical psychologist. That's like the head doctor, or what Tim calls the head doctor. I've had to go to the head doctor a lot, just even within the last month or so. But that's a therapist who's going to help me with my problems like depression and anxiety or whatever else you might have going on, like ADD or something like this. They're trying to treat and diagnose the problems that you might be struggling with, including me. I'm more of an experimental psychologist, which I call a scientific psychologist. I just want to know why people do the things they do. Like, why do people help each other? or not help each other. That has nothing to do, with like you're going to come in. I couldn't treat you. I don't have a license to treat somebody, but it has nothing to do with me trying to fix people's problems. It's like I just want to investigate why people, what are their underlying motives. For instance, when people get crowded together, why do they all of a sudden, get aggressive? That's different than me showing up to a psychologist and saying, "Hey, I'm depressed. Do you have any medication or kind of therapy that will help this out?" Okay, so hopefully that made sense. The third area is applied psychology. Apply. If I apply something, that means I use it. This is where I usually talk about Cesar Millan, the dog whisperer, and I'll get into him a little bit later. But I'm using psychology to solve real world problems. That's why I love. I didn't want to be a math major. I wanted to use math to do something. I was a math major for a while, but I have been an applied psychologist. I work in corporate America for Toyota, Bank of America, the Gallup polls, all these different companies where I would help them, analyze data, build mathematical models to try to predict either customer or also employee behavior. And so if you think about this, I just mentioned that business uses this. Business and psychology to me are the exact same thing. Think about branding and all these other things that I could get into, but I'm not teaching a marketing class. But sports, I'm always talking about coaches. Coaches are master psychologists. Even if I don't like them, like Bill Belichick or Nick Saban, they're just master psychologists. They already have a PhD in motivating people, knowing about cognition, affect, behavior, those three things that we started off with. Anyway, I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions, definitely email me or give me a call. I'm going to stop this part of the lecture now and start with research methods as a whole new lecture that you will see on the YouTube channel. See you next time.